Okay. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Merowitz Center's Fighting Bigotry and Hatred presentation on the Impact Lab. We are very excited. I'd like to take a moment to thank the co-sponsors before I pass it off to Jordan for the introduction. So I'd like to thank ADL Heartland. I'd like to thank NCJW, JCRC, AJC, and the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, of course. So with that for today, Jordan, I will hand it off to you for the intro.
Cool. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I have the great pleasure to introduce my partner and friend, Helen Turner. Helen's the Director of Education at St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. She received her bachelor's degree from Binghamton University and her master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. That's her specialty in history from Stony Brook University. And her thesis focused on collective Holocaust memory and memorial and representation in museums. We are very lucky to have her here in St. Louis, not just her vision and designing and opening the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, but as I have had the opportunity to start conducting workshops with her, I've noticed that I learn something new about Helen every time I see her present, and that is because she puts all of herself into her presentations, and that is one of the treats that we're all in store for today. So Helen, I am very much looking forward to learning more about the Impact Lab today. Take it away.
Oh, what a lovely and warm welcome. Thank you so much, Jordan. And the feeling is mutual. We have a really wonderful relationship with these organizations and I think as facilitators. So I really appreciate your kind words. So I wanted to begin, number one, just by saying thank you so much to Merowitz, to the Anti-Defamation League, to all the partners that have brought us together today, for allowing me to present on what I think is an interesting and important topic. And to all of you for showing up, thank you so much for being here. I also, and I know someone already mentioned it, but I too received the news about Sheldon Enger's passing last night. You know, I was only able to know Sheldon for a few years, but I found him to be a thoughtful, vibrant, interesting, extraordinary person. And I know that he will be deeply missed by this community and by those who knew and loved him. And so I wondered if we would maybe just have a moment of silence for him this morning. Thank you very much, everybody. And I think Sheldon would have had a lot to say about this topic that I'm going to present on. And so I hope to do him proud and engage in some of the work that I think he was so passionate about. So with all that being said, I'm going to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint presentation to follow along and some, I hope, interesting topics to bring to us as a group. So if I may. So you should now all be seeing my screen. It should say St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. Is that correct? Beautiful. All right, friends. So as Jordan mentioned, I'm Helen Turner. I am the Director of Education for the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. And I wanted to just say some welcomes and introductions of who I am and perhaps why I'm presenting to you on the Impact Lab. So there I am. That's me at opening. Not a bad photo, if I say so myself. But I came to the museum about 2 years ago, very specifically as a Holocaust scholar, as someone who had worked in the Holocaust education world for about a decade. And when I came to the museum, one of the things that so intrigued me about coming here to St. Louis when I was interviewing was that not only were they building an extraordinary Holocaust museum, which I was delighted and thrilled and nervous to be part of, but that they were also building this space called the Impact Lab. And when I began at the museum, we were really rolling around what is the Impact Lab and why do we need it? And that's really going to be the focus of my talk today. Why do we have the Impact Lab and exactly what is it looking to do? And for me, Impact Lab, which at the moment I'm imagining probably sounds like this kind of mercurial thing, by the end of this presentation, I hope that you have a really clear sense of what it is, what it aims to do, and why I truly believe it is a vital piece to Holocaust education. So when we think about Holocaust education, we often, and I'm sure many of us have been to Holocaust museums where, you witness this horrific history. We go through all of the stories. We look at life before. We look at the rise of anti-Semitism. We look at the rise of Nazism, of Adolf Hitler, and then we see, this sort of incredible crescendo of violence and mass murder. At the end of a Holocaust museum, you typically kind of come through your liberation story. You come to the end and you see survivors, much like you do in our museum, in new spaces, coming to the United States. They're having families. We celebrate their lives, their resilience, the incredibleness of their survival. And then we charge our visitors with never again. They have now witnessed this horrific history, and they must now go forth and prevent genocide, to prevent atrocities, to stand up to anti-Semitism. But my big question is, what does that mean for a 13-year-old, for a mom of two, for the retiree? What does that mean? Because to simply tell them that they must stand up to anti-Semitism and hatred is such a large thing to ask them to do. And to ask them to prevent a future genocide or stand up in the face of genocide in and of itself is a huge challenge. And I think it leads us to a difficult space. Sometimes I think it means that we're not actually talking about what anti-Semitism is. So when we talk about anti-Semitism, especially in the scope of a Holocaust museum, we're using a very extreme example. Right, we're talking about Nazis, Nazi supporters. We're talking about mass murder. And so we often get this kind of dichotomy where people are looking for the most extreme forms of anti-Semitism. As my slide says, often I think people are waiting for a Nazi, right? They're waiting for someone with a swastika to be yelling. They're waiting for violence. And I'm sure we all know that anti-Semitism doesn't always present itself that way or begin that way. And so we really want to talk about what is modern anti-Semitism and how it might slip into our world. Slipping in
for 10:25 a.m.
Myron, hello. Thank you very much, Daniel. And that anti-Semitism slips in the place of workplace discrimination, in the way of backhanded jokes, comments, slurs, stereotypes, all these other ways. And if we're waiting for the violence, we might not know how to speak up before it gets to that point. So when I was thinking about the Impact Lab, for me, it really is this connector between a history and action. And of course, the Holocaust and Holocaust education is answering hard questions. I don't know if anyone is familiar with this article. Actually, it's a really interesting article written by Dara Horn. She also famously wrote the book, People Love Dead Jews, which is a provocative title, but an extraordinary exploration into how there is a comfort in looking at sort of the Holocaust and deceased Jewish people and murdered Jewish people versus engaging in modern anti-Semitism and contemporary discussions about Judaism, anti-Semitism, etc. It's a great read. But in this article, she was really looking at Holocaust education, and that it's in her concern that it's feeding into current anti-Semitism. Some of the things I agree with in the article, some things I don't. But I think she's making a valid point in that we need to make sure that we're not just talking about the Holocaust as something that happened in a vacuum, that it was some sort of extraordinary, inevitable moment, and rather to do what I hope that Impact Lab is doing, which is to build a bridge between history and where we sit today. And that really was the idea for Impact Lab, that it would connect the Holocaust to contemporary visitors and allow them to see themselves not only as witnesses to a history, but to change makers in their world today. So with all that, right, I put a big charge out there, right, of sort of this thing that this space is going to do. You might still be asking yourself, what is the Impact Lab? The Impact Lab is a physical space inside of the museum. And when we talk about the museum means the entire museum complex. So that includes our permanent exhibition on the Holocaust, which is our main exhibition space. It includes our a special exhibition space on the lower level. It includes the research center. It includes the archives. And then Impact Lab is another space within the museum institution. So the first thing we got to kind of think about, it's a physical space. It was designed by the same folks who designed the permanent exhibition on the Holocaust. So these things were constantly talking to one another. It was designed by Gallagher and Associates. And we also worked with contemporary partners to help us in these discussions in the Impact Lab. It didn't come from any one brain. It came from a collection of discussions and some wonderful thought leaders. When I was designing Impact Lab, I had not yet met the wonderful Jordan. So I was working with some other folks that I know at the Anti-Defamation League. But we worked with ADL to look at the questions we ask in Impact Lab, how we represent certain moments. And we also worked with some wonderful partners at Facing History and Ourselves, which is another great organization that talks about the Holocaust, but also contemporary issues. So these folks all worked together along with our committee to create the discussion of the Impact Lab about what it was going to be and how it was going to use very sound pedagogical approaches to talk about the content in the Impact Lab. So the Impact Lab itself is really, I call it a gym for your brain. It's where you can take history and learn how to apply it to your life with real actions that you could take. Impact Lab is rooted in reality. It's rooted in you. And as you can see from this, this image that I have on the screen, it begins with a little pamphlet. That's what you're seeing here. And that pamphlet, the very first thing it asks you is about your identity. When we think about the Impact Lab and we think about our role in combating anti-Semitism, bigotry, hatred, stereotypes, all these things, we have to begin with who we are and what we're bringing to the table. So in the middle of that circle, people put their name. And of course, that's the name that they want to identify with. You know, maybe it's a nickname, maybe it's their given name, whatever name they identify with as them. On the arrows pointing out, they write down how the world sees them. Now, for you and I, for all of us on this Zoom, we know that the bodies that we're in convey messages to the world, right? You can see me, and you might have an idea about who I am because of the body that I'm in, or because of where I work or what I do. These are all outside things. Those are the outside arrows. Then the arrows pointing in, those are all about maybe things you wouldn't know about me just by looking at me. You might not know I've been here a long time, so my accent doesn't portray it as well anymore unless I'm reading out loud. But I'm from England, right? That's part of my hidden identity. And it has a lot to do with how I work in the world and how I see the world, how I was brought up. So the inside arrows are more hidden identities. But we start from this place of identity, of who we are, to acknowledge that we're all bringing something to the table. And that when I ask, when we workshop how to respond to anti-Semitism, it's going to look differently depending on my lived experience of that. Maybe I have never experienced anti-Semitism, so I'm feeling quite bold, and I can go up and say, hey, that's anti-Semitism. But maybe I'm in a body, or I live somewhere, or I'm wearing religious attire that would let you know that I'm Jewish, and therefore engaging in addressing anti-Semitism, I might feel more threatened. I might need to navigate it differently. I might have a history of experience with that, depending on my age and where I'm from. So our identity can really help us know what we're bringing to the table. So we begin with identity. Then we move into the physical space. So this is a bird's eye view of the Impact Lab. Obviously, this is the mock drawing because we couldn't take the roof off to have a nice picture for you. But the Impact Lab, as you can see, is a space to take the lessons of the Holocaust and apply them to our world today. It's a space of self-exploration and curiosity. It's also a space of action and acceptance. We want people to be really grappling with the topics represented in this space through their own lens, through who they are and what's realistic for them. Our pedagogical approach to the Impact Labs, this is how we approach the teaching, is really about examining roles and responsibilities. And again, I mentioned that Impact Lab was designed by the same folks who designed the Holocaust exhibition. So you'll see this also represented in the Holocaust exhibition. It's all about the roles that people played in history, the responsibility we want to give them for their choices, and their lack of choices. There's responsibility in that as well. And to really make sure that we hold every human being that we're representing as a person, and that we hold them to their choices, to their actions, and often to their inactions. And in the Impact Lab, we use the Holocaust as our base, as our case study, to look at a lot of other moments in history as well, but starting from that foundation. So there are 5 sections of the Impact Lab, which I'm going to go through for us. So there's 3 sections that are really action-based, where we're doing more lesson planning, talking about big topics. The first one is the spiral of hate. This is actually a curriculum that's already in the museum. It was created by the folks here at the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. And it's all about, again, the spiral of hate. How do we get to genocide? How do we see these things happen? And what are the steps and stages that make up a genocide? Again, we use the Holocaust as a case study. We know that it was a genocide. And as with all genocides, there are extremely unique tenets to the Holocaust, right? The time, the place, the targeted group, how it came to be. But we also know that genocides tend to follow patterns. And when we can identify those patterns, we can see warning signals. So the spiral of hate shows us some of those warning signals as we circle from stereotypes down to prejudice, discrimination, violence, and we land in genocide. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. So that's the spiral of hate. How do we get to genocide? And key, how do we reverse it? The second space is bystanders to active allies. This is where, again, we're looking at the Holocaust, right? We know a lot of people witnessed things during the Holocaust and were silent. We want to take away the shame and the blame of being a bystander. We don't need to do a show of hands, but I am very sure we've all been there, right? I've certainly been in moments when I have frozen. I have not known what to do or how to react, or I'm shocked. I'm so surprised by what I'm seeing. So we don't want to necessarily blame our bystanders. We want to understand that behavior and our own behavior as bystanders. So once we understand sort of why we might be a bystander in a moment, how do we move along a scale to becoming an active ally? And we chose the word active ally thoughtfully. A lot of spaces are using the word upstander. Great word. But for me, upstander is a very solo activity, right? I stand up. I am the upstander. But when I think of an active ally, I'm someone who kind of like links arms with other allies. I'm not alone. I'm joining something. And also to be an active ally means that perhaps there's some kind of issue that's going on. And instead of me being the upstander saying, hey, Helen, I want to talk on this topic, I'm actually saying, hey, Helen, have a platform and a community that I'm part of. How can I raise your voice, affected person, so you can talk about the topic? So there's different ways of being an active ally. For me, this section of the Impact Lab is really where the rubber meets the road. We give examples, and I'll go through them a little bit, about things we might see in our lives. And then how we want to respond, how we currently respond, and where we want to move to. How do we create a more robust toolkit of responses when we see anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, you name it, bigotry, hatred, etc. The third big section is on genocide and hate crimes. Here we wanted to be really clear about what a genocide is and what it is not, and what a hate crime is and what it is not, with very clear definitions. And then in this space, we really wanted people to explore what it means to bear witness, to hear the story of another. And even though I might not be able to change your story or fix your pain, I can hold your story and I can bear witness to what happened to you. And so I really think this is a very powerful section of the Impact Lab. It resonates very, very deeply with folks that have experienced it. And we chose 7 genocides, the Holocaust being one of them, and 7 hate crimes, so that people could really explore the different way that these things present around the world, both in history and today. And we also wanted the space to be extremely contemporary, that it could change with the moment. And so it's very digital based, and it's got these wonderful cards where you can read people's stories that can be changed out as things happen and as we need to address, unfortunately, new and evolving genocides and hate crimes. Now, the next 2 sections, you'll see they're a little bit below because they're a little bit different. The 3 I've just illustrated to you, and I'm going to go through them in more detail. Those are more of our workshop spaces. Those require action. You're either writing something, reading something, touching something. There's an experience there. The next 2 sections are more thought pieces. All around the room, we have active allies. These are folks that are literally, they've taken an action against some kind of, human rights abuse, stereotype, anti-Semitic, you name it. They've done something, and they are literally shoulder to shoulder with you in the Impact Lab. So we tried to make them kind of life size. And that's because the only difference between them and you is in action, big or small. But they're there kind of as your cheerleaders to give us inspiration and to see ourselves in change makers. So they're just around the room. And that last one is the impact response wall. As an educator, but also as a human being, we need to make sure we give people space to digest what they've learned, what they've seen, and also where they want to take it. And so the response wall is, for me, it's truly a beautiful part of the room. And it gives people that moment, again, to kind of digest, reflect, and think about where they want to take this experience forward. So now I've kind of given you the framework, and I wanted to deep dive into some of the aspects of the Impact Lab, and also to get you thinking about some of these topics. I don't want this to just be a lecture. I have a video that I want us to watch. I've got some questions for you. And so now I'm going to take us further into the Impact Lab. So here are some maybe familiar faces. Jewish Federation was one of our pilot groups. They did a great job, and so you will see them heavily represented in my PowerPoint because I was allowed to take photos of them. But here they are. They're sat in one of the sections of the Impact Lab, gazing intently as they're ready to dive into this work, which I hope that you are as well. So as I mentioned, one of our first sections is the spiral of hate. The spiral of hate, this is again a mock-up of the room. As you can see, it is a spiral. And we chose a spiral because genocide doesn't happen with very clear, defined steps all the time. Sometimes, yes, but often it's more of a slippery slope of action, and often inaction in response. And so we really wanted to show how things can turn and shift into genocide, but also how they can reverse and be spun in the opposite direction. So the goals of this section are to teach the spiral of hate. What is it? To use the Holocaust as a case study. Where do we see all of these steps represented in the Holocaust? And then to use modern examples. Where are these things happening in the world around us today? Where they happened in other places in the past? And then how do we change them? What parts of the spiral are individual actions, like about stereotypes or discrimination? And where do we need government or larger group intervention? Like when we're talking about genocide, that's not something I can personally go and prevent. I need my government behind me, an army, the United Nations. I need some bigger backup. So on the spiral, there are a series of definitions of what takes us to genocide. So we begin with stereotypes. This is something I'm sure we're all familiar with, but I do want to do a bit of a deeper dive with us. But we know that stereotypes are beliefs about people, groups of people, based on real or often imagined characteristics about that group. Stereotypes are often negative, but not always, as we shall discover. And they usually kind of pigeonhole people, right? We say that you're part of this group. And so I have this one little nugget of something I think I know. And because I think you're part of that group, I think you're all like that. Right? And stereotypes serve to hurt us because they divide us. They say that there's something different between you and I. There's some otherness there. And it can start out very simply, right? Stereotypes are often expressed in bad jokes, offhanded comments, little slights, slurs, or words to describe a group. And that they can contribute to this othering, to this differentiation, which can really lead to dehumanization, the language that we use. And that kind of bleeds in or blends into prejudice. The preconceived opinion that's not based on reason or an actual experience. It's a prejudice to prejudge a human being based on the group I think they belong to. They might not even belong to that group. It's a prejudgment. The next is discrimination. So the first two on that spiral, they're kind of individual actions. They're things that we might contribute to, right? I have stereotypes. I'm a human being. We're going to talk about the messiness of being human, but I also hold prejudices. That's me. Discrimination is more on an institutional level, right? How do we see discrimination being played out in our society, both historically and today? And discrimination is the unfair treatment of people based on race, religion, age, any kinds of other characteristics, right, about their personhood. And discrimination can look like workplace discrimination, not getting a job. It can look like housing discrimination, redlining, where people are allowed to live or get mortgages or loans. And it can also look, as we saw both in the Holocaust and in our own American history, where people can sit, where they're allowed to be on the bus, the schools they can attend. Right? Discrimination has many levels of institutional discrimination. The next level is violence. And obviously this is physically hurting a person because of the group I think they're part of. I also want to extrapolate on the violence that it doesn't just have to be against a human being's body. The violence can also be enacted on a space, a place. When we think about the desecration of synagogues or cemeteries, mosques, these are spaces that we know are connected for worship for groups of people. And when they are attacked, be it through spray painting or armed attacks or destroying that space, that too is violence. And our final level is genocide. I think it's really important to know that genocide is a crime. It's committed with the intent to destroy, in part or in whole, you don't have to be successful, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, in whole or in part. Genocide obviously is much more complicated than that. There are many tenets to genocide. But I think this really kind of gets us to what genocide is and is not. So these are the things that are on the spiral. But I actually wanted us, as a workshop today, to begin with something that's not on the spiral. Because the way we even get to that baby layer is through something called bias. Now, before we jump into bias, because I know it can be a touchy topic, I have a confession. I am a person, just like you are. And even though my whole job is to be an upstander, it's to be an active ally, it's to be this champion, right, of human rights, I too have bias. Because I was raised by regular human beings who also had bias. I was raised in our society, which teaches me things about groups of people, gives me messages. And I want to kind of level set with that because we all have bias. And having bias, it doesn't make us, here we go. It doesn't make us racist. It doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us ignorant. It doesn't make us unkind. It makes us human. We all have bias. What's important is we understand where that bias comes from and how I can address it when it pops up. So bias are just those little beliefs that we have about other human beings. It is something that we all have, even if we love every person on earth, right? We all have a little bit of bias in us, and that's okay. And again, it doesn't make us a bad person. It makes us something to learn from. And we are not born with bias. It's something that is learned. And we are taught it through society, through our parents, through our grandparents, all the different ways that we're just people out there in the world. It's also taught to us through movies, media, friends. But because it's learned, it can be unlearned. And of course, there's different kinds of bias. So I actually have a little video that I want to play for us, which I hope will help us sort of explore this idea of bias and what it means. So I'm just going to tee up my tech, if you don't mind. And I'm actually going to look to Daniel. If you could just give me a thumbs up to make sure that you can hear it. I hope I've programmed it correctly, but I'll look for your cue.
Implicit bias exists when we unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. For example, we often harbor negative stereotypes about others without consciously realizing that we do so. Implicit bias, which is also called unconscious bias or implicit social cognition, is a prejudice that is deep-seated within the brain, below the conscious level. Studies have demonstrated implicit bias against racial groups, genders, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups. We may even be prejudiced against our own group, although we tend to favor our in-group with positive stereotypes and disfavor out-groups with negative stereotypes.
The immediate feeling you get or the immediate thoughts you have about a person, an assumption you feel, just anything you feel really stems somewhere from an experience you've had or your upbringing.
Depends on the region you're from, the country you're from, the background you grew up in. That shapes the person's unconscious bias.
I think sometimes you don't even realize it, but your own actions, maybe the way you treat others as opposed to treating others that look like you or that act like you or that are your friends.
Implicit bias often runs counter to people's conscious, expressed beliefs. Few physicians espouse racially discriminatory views, and yet doctors tend to recommend less pain medication for Black patients than for white patients with the identical injury. In other words, people can be explicitly unbiased, yet implicitly biased, according to psychologist Daniel Kelly and colleagues.
One of my closest friends since high school, we've worked on a lot of projects together, we've been in a lot of classes together. Sometimes we'd be working together in a group project, for example, and she would say stuff like, oh, you're good at math, you're good at science, here, you can take this part of the project or something. I don't hold it against her or anything, and she doesn't mean any harm by it, but obviously there's that implicit sort of bias or stereotype that Asians are better at math and science.
So that's just a short video, but I think it really packs a really powerful punch. And I don't know if people are comfortable with this, but I would love to hear from you, perhaps in the chat, because there's quite a lot of us on this call. What do you think about this video? Did it bring anything up for you? So to use the chat, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a little button that says chat, and you can pop your comments in there, and I will read them out for us. Because I am just so curious what people think. What did you think of that video? So you can write something in there if nobody wants to write anything in. I'm also very happy, and I think Daniel is really controlling the Zoom to make sure that we can all hear and see. But if anyone would like to comment, if you want to maybe raise your hand and unmute yourself, I'd love to hear what you think.
One thing I'll say about the video, I thought it was really interesting how sympathetic she was to, like the person's bias. She was like, I don't really blame them, she's like, I don't take it personally. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, the young lady is saying that, she's being stereotyped as being someone of Asian heritage who's presenting as good at math. And she's already saying, that, that the person doesn't mean anything bad by it, but it's just a stereotype they have or a bias they have based on her physical representation. I believe that the video is unbiased. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting. Thank you, Linda. It is a very relatable video, right? Because I think it brings up this happens to all of us. I love the doctor example, where it says like people are saying, not at all, they don't see any bias. And yet it's unconscious. It's something that we don't even realize is there, which is why some of this internal work of thinking about it can really help us address it. Thank you, Lee. I agree. I think using the cat and the dog and all that kind of stuff is very humorous. It's non-threatening. And I think it gets us all to that conversation of the fact that, look, we all have this. And it's okay. It doesn't make us bad people. It's just something to really think about. So thank you all very much. See, I see Sue. I think we all can see ourselves in this trap that has been set for us through our experiences and exposure to others' attitudes. Yeah, because we're taught all these things about how we're different, and it can seem very sort of below the surface. And a big workshop that I usually do with folks, especially in the Impact Lab, is to think about so for us, how our grandparents described different groups of people, and what they would have said about different groups. And I use grandparents because they're nice and far removed from us, right? And they probably had a completely different experience of the world. They probably used really different language to talk about people from different religious groups or racial groups, ethnic groups, genders, and to see how far that language has come, and to see where we are now, but to also understand that they were exposed to the same things too. We're all learning together how to rehumanize each other. I see a hand from a phone number. Go ahead, friend.
Yeah, Marilyn, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. What's so amazing to me is how so many people are Holocaust deniers. They say that the evidence was forged, or they say the death rates were exaggerated and 6 million Jews did not die, and all this. That, to me, is unbelievable and unforgivable.
No, thank you for
That's just one comment I have.
No, thank you for your comment, Marilyn. I completely agree. I think Holocaust denial, it's something that completely baffles me. And how people get to that space. And some of it is obviously very driven by anti-Semitism, by stereotypes of Jewish, these old tropes of Jewish control of the world, of money, of all these very deeply anti-Semitic things. And that we're constantly battling both denial, saying the Holocaust didn't happen, and also distortion, playing with the numbers and saying, it's not as bad, 2 million, 3 million, and how people deny through distortion. So final comment before we move on. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I see Rita saying, it appears she doesn't take action and share with her friend the issue about saying such things, but can still hurt. I love that you bring up that point about the young lady in the video, right? She's talking about this stereotype that she's experiencing, but she's not saying, hey, actually, that's not me. You're putting me in a box, right? And maybe because she doesn't have the language or the tools to do that, which is the whole point of the Impact Lab. And Brian Bass is saying, my favorite poster is, everyone is a good person until you get to know them. Interesting. And everybody is a good person, I guess, but there's always layers to people, right? And how we kind of interact with people. It's kind of an interesting take, but an interesting thought for sure. So with that level of looking at bias and kind of understanding that we all have it, where it's coming from, the first rung on the spiral of hate is stereotypes. And I think those are probably something we've all had a lot of exposure to. And again, they're a widely held, often negative belief about a person or a group that we think the person belongs to. And again, stereotypes are that problem because they other people, right? They say that you're part of that group and I'm part of this group, just like the cat and the dog. And then when something threatens that group, I might not be so quick to act or to defend them. And they might not be so quick to act or defend me because I have a false belief about who they are. And to Marilyn's point, like when we think about Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, there's so many anti-Semitic stereotypes out there. And it does take all of us to really combat and challenge those. But when I say combat and challenge, that can mean different things to different people in different moments. And that is the point of the Impact Lab. How do we know what stereotypes are, which is this first section, and then in 2 sections from now when I talk about it, what do we actually do about it? How do you confront that stereotype? So this is part 1. The next section of the Impact Lab, as I said, is about rejecting hatred. And I think, again, and I don't mean to keep bringing up Marilyn, but she makes a really good point. Holocaust denial and distortion is something we're constantly working against. And so in this section, it really talks about what was the Holocaust, to define genocides, to put the Holocaust in a context of genocide, and to make extremely clear there is no debate of if the Holocaust happened. This is an absolute fact. And it sits within a realm of other genocides, and to look at these as crimes with evidence. So as I said, the educational goals of genocide and hate crimes is to define what these things are, to have extremely clear definitions, to show the Holocaust was a unique event but that it fits within a context of genocide and hate crimes, and to bear witness to other genocides and hate crimes. So we have definitions of these things in the Impact Lab. So one of the definitions of genocide, and again, this is not a full definition, it's written at an 8th grade reading level, but just kind of get our groups that are in the space an understanding what genocide is, that it is a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. This includes murder, causing physical or mental harm, imposing measures to prevent birth, and forcibly removing children. These are some of the core tenets of genocide. And the same holds for a hate crime. That word is used a lot, right? Something happens, we're like, was it a hate crime? We need to define what a hate crime is. So hate crime is a crime motivated by bias against race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability. It's a actual crime, but it's motivated by these things. That gives it the hate crime element. And again, in this space, we're really just asking people to bear witness, to look at these two things and find connection and humanity in them. And so these are some images of this section. You can see, so this is, we have a wall of 7 genocides and 7 hate crimes, and they're on these beautiful placards. The one that's in focus here is actually Hilda Lebanon, who was a Holocaust survivor, and we have many of her items at the museum. I don't know if anyone knew Hilda. But it's a card with her face. On the reverse is an explanation of the Holocaust, a quote from Hilda, and a question for the group about genocide. And so this pertains for all 7 genocides and all 7 hate crimes that are in that space. And you can see the back of one of the cards that someone is holding. And so again, this really is a space for reflection, for acknowledgement, and exactly to Margaret's point, to truly understand the gravity of the Holocaust and other genocides. Then the third section, which we've also already talked about, is called Inspire Change, to move from that bystander to becoming an active ally. And so the goals of this section are that I truly believe that to say never again, or to simply remember, like to simply remember the Holocaust, it's not enough. It takes action. It takes a constant commitment to fighting anti-Semitism, to fighting denial, to challenging stereotypes. And in this space, we want to practice real-world scenarios. So the things that we really will see. And again, this is that connection, that connective tissue of when we say anti-Semitism, to not wait for the Nazi. When we see anti-Semitism, someone making a stereotypical remark, someone calling someone a cheap Jew, someone, all different kinds of ways that we say anti-Semitism present. How do we call it out? And it's all about using your wheelhouse. So, oftentimes, people say to me, well, you're paid to be a Holocaust educator, you're a paid upstander, an active ally. So you must know how to respond. So they think that if I'm in a meeting or something, or I'm somewhere where something is said, I will stand up and say, hey, that's anti-Semitism. We don't do that. But I also know who I am. I'm a relatively shy, soft-spoken sometimes person. And so for me to suddenly yell, that's anti-Semitism, might not fit me. So something I'm really good at is to create a distraction, to drop something, to spill my coffee, to say, oh, I'm just getting a phone call. Hold on just a minute. It gives me a minute to think about my response. And so then I can craft something that says, what you just said, I'm finding it, I'm not understanding what you're saying. Could you please explain that? And then they'll have to explain the stereotype or the trope or whatever they've just used. And they can usually feel embarrassed, or they're like, oh, wow, when I say it out loud, that's not what I meant at all. It's just a different gateway in. And of course, that's just one example among many. But this space is really about how you'll see prejudice, bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism, etc. in our actual world. And then letting you practice what you'll really do. And that's why we say that response is really on the spectrum, right? We kind of start in the neutral zone. We're kind of walking around neutral. And sometimes we might be a bit more passive, and sometimes we might be a bit more active. Again, that depends on the situation. The example I always give is, and it's an example in the Impact Lab. It's a very different thing to be, one of the examples is you're out to dinner and the check comes and you go to sign it and someone says, hey, don't be a cheap Jew, right? It's one thing if that scenario happens with my friends. I say, excuse, what are you saying? Like, that's not appropriate. That's anti-Semitic. Please don't say that. They're my friends. They'll respond to me that way. They'll say, oh, sorry, Helen. But what if I'm out to a business dinner and a donor that I'm trying to get to respond to the museum is saying that? It changes what's happening. It changes the leverage I have as someone who represents a museum. It's a different dynamic. So how do I practice for that scenario also? How do I lean into my spectrum of response and what's possible in different moments? And the Impact Lab is your space to practice those responses. We don't always have to have the perfect response, but it is about responding in a way that we can. Then the final section I wanted to discuss is those active allies that we spoke about that are around the wall, standing shoulder to shoulder with you. We wanted to show a really diverse collection of actions, causes, and people, so representing all different walks of life. And we really looked for imperfect people, right? A, there's no perfect people, but B, we wanted people that didn't fit a particular mold, that they can stand up and speak out against different, human rights violations, atrocities, etc. But they're also people too. They're messy, and that it's okay for us also to be messy, to not always be perfect, to not always get it right, but to continue to keep working towards better responses. And there's no activity in this section. It really is just about learning from these people, reading their stories, and seeing ourselves in them. And then finally, we come to the reflection wall, which is where people write truly the most beautiful responses to what they've learned in the Impact Lab, of what motivates them, what moves them, and where they want this conversation to go. And it truly has been a really inspiring space. But the overall goal of the Impact Lab is to educate, but it's really to inspire. It's that change begins with us and with you. That when we think about, the different human rights violations, stereotypes, biases, anti-Semitism, when we think about all of these things in our world, it is up to us to do something, to change something, to shift the conversation. But it's not enough just to say you have to do it. It is not enough to be a Holocaust museum that just represents this history. It has to translate into action, into something we can all do, something we can all take a grip of and move forward in our world and in our lives. And so with all of that, that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm very happy to take any questions. I'll stop presenting so I can see all of you. But I truly believe in the work of the Impact Lab. I think it's a powerful, inspirational, vital space that really makes the Holocaust so relevant, so contemporary, and so vital to not only student education, but education for everyone. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions. I see a hand from Norman. Go ahead, sir.
I'm interested primarily in a personal response in a small group of people, some of whom I know and some of whom I don't know. Let's say there's about 6 other people beside me. I'm maybe the only Jew in the group that I can recognize. And maybe there are 2 people there I've never met before. And the other people I know either well or casually. But let's say one of the 2 people I don't know makes some anti-Semitic remark to our group. Let's say he says, well, that's the way Jews are, they've been that way throughout history. And he's referring to, you go to a Jewish retailer, well, not a Jewish retailer, but you go to a retailer and you want to buy something, and the clerk there has a Jewish name. So this guy says I'm interested in the particular model here, which happens to be a lower end price model. And then the Jewish name clerk says, well, we don't have that anymore, or it's been discontinued, but we have this other model. It's a little better. It's got a few more features on it, but it does cost a little more. And he says, this is just so typical of the way Jews behave. So this guy has this prejudice built in. How do I respond as a Jew in this small group of people?
Well, Norman, I think your question is, obviously it sounds quite deeply personal, and it's a great question. And I think, the first thing to always think about is your level of comfort. So you said that you know some of the people, like in the scenario, you know some of the people in the group. So that means that maybe you've got allies there who will also kind of back you up if things get a little hairy. But there's also two unknowns. You're not sure how they're going to respond. So I would say, depending on your comfort level, you can call it as you see it, right? And say, actually, what you're saying is actually deeply rooted in anti-Semitic stereotypes. I'm not sure you knew that, but it hurts me. What you're saying hurts me. So you can very direct approach if you want. Or if you're not sure how it's going to go, I tend to lead with a question. And it could be, excuse me, what do you mean by that? Or I don't know what you mean. But by leading with a question, you're forcing that person to explain. And I'll have to say, like, oh, well, don't you know that about all Jewish people? Or they'll say something along those lines, probably. And then that opens the door for you to say, actually, I'm Jewish. I don't know if you knew that, but this is a stereotype about Jewish people, and you can explain why it's hurtful. So I think for me, I would really see two approaches: either be very blunt and direct, especially if you feel safe within the group and you've got some allies who'll back you up, or answer with a question that's going to take you where you want to go, but gives you a little bit more runway to build it. I hope that's helpful. But I think every scenario is different, and it really is about finding what feels comfortable. Also, something that I do, and we practice in the Impact Lab, practice what you're going to say. I used to have to engage with somebody in my former life in New York, so nobody here in St. Louis, but in my former life in New York, I had to engage with someone who was very, very difficult. And I would practice with my hands on my steering wheel before every meeting I had with them exactly what I was going to say when they said the very stereotypical remarks that they would say to me. And finally, after all this practice, every time I met with them, I practiced with my hands on my steering wheel. When I was in a meeting with them and they came at me with something, I didn't have to think about it. I'd already practiced what I was going to say. I put my hands on the desk and I said it. So practice can also really help. I hope that's helpful, Norman. I see another hand. I think it's from Marilyn again. Go ahead.
Okay. If someone made an anti-Semitic remark to me, I would say, I resent that, and what do you mean? And very briefly, a friend of mine and I, if all of you remember Storm Montaldo's, it was in St. Louis, they hired Joanne Glazer and myself to work there. And I later found out we were the only two Jews, that they were anti-Semitic. If I had known that, I never, ever would have worked there. That's just a point. But I have a question, and I know it's a strange question, but to me, there is nothing as bad as the Holocaust. Killing Jews' children, putting them in ovens. And it seems to me, and I don't think I'm a prejudiced person, I don't think, but all you hear is racism, everything. And I don't think you hear enough today about anti-Semitism. I really don't. How would you compare the two as far as the lynchings years ago, as an example, and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, there's nothing as bad as the Holocaust. Nothing.
So Marilyn, your point is well taken. It's a question I get a lot. So here at the museum, and I know Holocaust educators around the world grapple with this question. And we, as a community, and myself certainly, believe that there is no hierarchy of pain. Nothing is gained by comparing different experiences of hurt or murder or statistics. What we want to do is connect. And that's why, and I hope you saw it in my presentation, the Holocaust was a very unique event. Every genocide is very unique. But they've followed certain core tenets of dehumanization. So I don't think that anything is gained from creating a hierarchy of pain. I think that just alienates and hurts. But there is so much to be gained by making connections of how human beings treat one another, of pain, of murder, of all these kinds of things. And so, you know, I would say we need to make sure that no one story takes all the oxygen out of the room, but that all stories are represented and understood, and seen for the actions that happened. You know, the Holocaust was an extraordinarily unique and extremely painful experience. And we do talk a lot about anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism, but we also know that it is unfortunately a very painful story in the human fabric of extremely painful stories. And so I don't think there's anything to be gained raising one above another, but really to make connections between how human beings have been treated. Any other questions? You're very welcome. Thank you for your question. I see some good comments in the chat. So from Brian Bass, sometimes people don't listen to the words that just came out of their mouth. So true. Who among us has not popped our foot in our mouth, myself included? And yet that's why whenever someone calls me out, if I've said something offensive or whatever I've said, I do try and see it as a learning opportunity of, you know, thank you so much. I didn't know what I've just said was either stereotypical, you know, whatever the thing is, I'm trying to learn too. But we can only do that when we call each other out and we continue to advocate for better language and deeper understanding for all of us. Any other final questions?
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. I really appreciate your comments and participation.
I have a quick question, Helen.
Daniel.
Talk a lot about like confronting like the casual prejudices and things like that. How much faith do you have in like people who are like really far down, like deprogramming people who are really far down that path, you know? Do you have strong faith that there's good strategies for that, or what are your thoughts?
And that's a fantastic question. The optimist in me wants to say you can reach everyone. The realist in me says that some people you can't. I have done a lot of work with the Department of Justice and working on restorative justice with teenagers. So this is usually students who come to me, they're usually with their lawyer, they've done something. Usually it's a swastika at school or a Heil Hitler or something like that. And we do restorative justice, which is a lot about, you know, what did you do? What motivated you to do that? And how do we make a sincere apology and move forward and learn from it? And I think when you meet people, especially at a young age, that restorative justice can do a lot of really good work. I think it gives ownership, responsibility, and a chance for the apology, which is important, and then a chance for the changing of actions. I have been involved in a few things where it was more of an adult, and to meet them, and again, this is all of my experience in New York. Haven't done it yet here in St. Louis. But where I did meet people and I was extremely discouraged. I found it really hard to reach them. You know, their prejudice was so deep. But I also know of some incredible sort of restorative stories. There's some fantastic people who were born and raised in truly, you know, white supremacist, extremist environments, and they've been able to come out of that through human connection. There's a great documentary called The Cure for Hate, which is all about a young man who was born into white supremacy and how he, by meeting people in his life, was able to actually really change. And he ended up going to Auschwitz. He had this incredible experience, and he's now become this tremendous advocate. So I think probably he's a little on the rare side, which is why it's so important that we address things with children, with students at young ages, and that we call these things out in our lives when they're casual before they get so big. But I think for people that are truly so angry and in so much sort of hate and violence, it just takes a lot longer and more of a system around them and some kind of aha moment. So while that might be on the rarer side, I do believe it's possible. That's a great question. It's all about human connection. When you see the targeted group as people, it can really break down some of those stereotypes and preconceived notions you had. And Rita, I really appreciate your comment about using the oops and the ouch. Yes, as a facilitator of these conversations, for those of us who are on here, the oops means I made a mistake, and the ouch is calling out a hurt that has been done against me. And I'm sure if you're reading that, you're like, well, that sounds so simple. But truly, if you're in a meeting or in some kind of environment where someone says something, you go, oh, I always put you can't see my hands. I always put my hands to my chest. I go, oh, ouch, that, I don't know if you meant that, but that hurt. People are like, whoa, I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just saying this thing. And you can be like, well, that's actually hurtful. And here's why. It's a doorway for a conversation. And to Brian, you say, do you agree that bias and prejudice increases with age? Great question. I mean, I don't know if increase is the right word, or that it becomes more firmly embedded. I think especially with today's day and age, the way we can all interact online, I don't need to meet people in person as much. And also, if I have a core belief about a group of people, I can find folks online who will back up and agree with that core belief. And so it just becomes an echo chamber of everybody agreeing with me, and it can become far, far deeply embedded for me. Like, no, all my friends think this way, all this, and it's because I'm just talking to my small community. So I don't know that it's just getting older that increases it. I think it becomes embedded the more we stay within a circle of self-fulfilling narrative of what we think we already know to be true, which is why getting out, meeting people, having respectful, delightful debates and conversation is so key. Because when we meet people, those prejudices, those preconceived notions, they fall away, because we see that we all have so much more in common than we do that's different. Any other final questions or thoughts? Oh, I'm so grateful for your engagement and for chatting with me about this, even on Zoom. This is becoming a really lovely conversation, so thank you.
I can't remember if you mentioned at the beginning, but for anyone who wants to come see it in person, times and contact, I guess.
Thank you very much for the reminder. Yes, that's a perfect way for us to end, is that the Impact Lab is open to the public. So you can come and see us at our public hours, which are on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock, and also on Saturdays at 2 o'clock. And these are you pay for the Impact Lab ticket, which is $3, and then you would join a group of strangers if you bring some friends for the facilitated experience of the Impact Lab, which is about an hour and 15-minute run time. Very well worth it. But I would also encourage you, you're all connected to the Mirowitz Center. We would love to have an organized group of you all come to the museum to do the Impact Lab experience. Actually, I see some of my fellow facilitators and folks from the museum here on the call. So I would love to see you all and to have you in the space. We're also doing a lot of programming with the Impact Lab. So dialing into different topics and things that are represented in there. So we've got some great public program coming up as we move into the end of 2023, and we are preparing for 2024. So we sincerely hope to see you at the museum. And especially if you're at Mirowitz or connected to Mirowitz, you're right by us. Stop on in. We've got some great books on this topic, and we would love to chat with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Helen. That was an incredible presentation. I think, we all learned a lot and really appreciated that. And, it was a great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. And I hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care. Have a good one.